sharing knowledge and sharing software is tremendously important. Yes, a lot of the software that we use in Fusion Energy is proprietary and closed source.
When I met Rémi Delaporte-Mathurin, my guest for this episode, he just finished the first open source software conference in Fusion Energy, snappily called OSSFE, that he and others organized. To say that it's not been exactly easy for Rémi to get to this point would be an understatement. Let's just say that not everybody in the field of nuclear fusion warms to the idea of open source software and open science principles, as you will hear in the conversation I had with him. It's not the first time that I cover nuclear fusion together with the software used in the field in this podcast. Some of you might remember my interviews with Adam Stephen from the UK Atomic Energy Authority or with Simon Pinches from ITER a few years ago. Of course, since then, nuclear fusion has remained a hot topic, as a lot of hopes are pinned on being able to use it as a reliable and sustainable energy source in the future. Predictions on when this might happen vary, but you do see the occasional reports saying that progress is made and that we're getting closer to the real thing. Software plays an essential part in making this happen, for instance the modeling and simulation processes. Alas, for the most part, the software tools are not openly accessible, which has led to quite a bit of duplicated effort and reinventing the wheel. The use of open source software and indeed open science principles has met with resistance, at least in some quarters of the field. But attitudes seem to be changing. And in fact, I remember when I met Simon Pinches and his colleague Olivier Hoenen for a site visit of the ITER test reactor in the south of France 2 years ago, they plan to turn at least some of the tools to open source software. So when Adam Stephen from the UK contacted me last year to point me to a conference on open source software in fusion energy, I got very curious. And I wanted to get in touch with the organizer of the event, Rémi Delaporte-Mathurin, who kindly agreed to talk to me. As I indicated in the intro, Rémi's journey towards open source software and open science hasn't been an easy one, but rather than swallowing his frustration, Rémi decided to do something about it and turn it around. And one of the actions led to this very first open source software in fusion energy conference, which happened in March this year, 2025. But I better let Rémi explain how it all came about.
My name is Rémi Delaporte-Mathurin. I'm a research scientist at the Plasma Science and Fusion Center at MIT. I've been working in fusion energy for, almost 10 years now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, actually not quite 10 years. I started working in 2017 in the UK. Then I did my PhD in France and a postdoc at MIT, and I've remained at MIT since.
Did you do anything else apart from fusion energy?
No, actually. I have my background is in thermal energy sciences. And I did all my placements at uni in fusion energy, and I've been working in that field since I'm a student. It's a good thing. I love
it. I'm not denying it at all. And I think you know Adam Stephen from the UK Energy Authority.
Yes, Adam is a common friend. So when I started working in fusion, I did a placement at the UK AEA, so the UK Atomic Energy Authority. Not very long, maybe like 4 months. Yeah, that was my first placement in fusion. I didn't work with Adam. I directly worked with another department, but I had a great time.
Oh, excellent. So now you're in Massachusetts, and I believe that you just ran the first ever conference of open source software in fusion energy, which is really what we want to talk about today. Because The reason I'm saying this is because I met with Stephen Pincher from ITER with the site in Cadarache in the south of France, near Aix-en-Provence, I think a couple of years ago, actually. I had a couple of interviews with him. At the time, they had proprietary software, and they were trying to bring up more open source software, or at least open source software components for the work they're doing, which I think was to do with simulation, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So it'll be interesting to hear from you what prompted you to start with a conference in open source software?
Sure. So I think it'd be good to go back a couple of years, even before that first conference. Me and open source, we go a long way. We need software in fusion energy for various things, for simulation, modeling some physical phenomena that's going on in a reactor, also for diagnostics and data analysis and all that kind of stuff. The problem that we have in this community in fusion is that fusion is you talked about ITER. ITER is a big international collaboration, and fusion is still a small field, not small, but rather niche. You don't have fusion researchers everywhere and fusion labs everywhere. So sharing knowledge and sharing software is tremendously important. Yes, a lot of the software that we use in fusion energy is proprietary and closed source. My personal experience with that is when I started working in fusion, I work in a very special field of fusion, which is the fuel. I work on modeling where the hydrogen, which is the fuel of fusion, goes in components and materials. And for that, we need to have some modeling tools to be able to simulate the migration of hydrogen in components. And when I started working on this during my PhD, I realized that there were many, many tools in our community to do this. And all these tools were homemade codes built in each individual labs, but not shared. In Europe alone, you had maybe, a dozen codes that do the same thing, but not shared. And so you end up with several issues here. The first one, the obvious one, is duplication of effort. Instead of having 10 people working together to build one product and then share it, they duplicate the work and effectively they're 10 times slower.
Sorry if I interrupt a little bit, because one of the questions that intrigues me when I hear proprietary software, or when we say proprietary software, it always sounds a little bit like commercial software. What you're talking about is really researchers doing something in their labs, isn't it?
Yes, that's why I don't use the word proprietary as much as closed source. They're not making any money off it and all, but it's codes that were written by maybe a PhD student or a postdoc in the lab, and then they never open sourced it and it remained in the lab. Best case scenario, the postdoc or the student remained in the lab and continued maintaining it at the lab. Worst case scenario, that person left, and then
yes, as they do, as PhDs.
Yeah, right. People leave, and then you end up with no maintainers, and the code eventually dies. And that's basically what happened in my PhD. So I had to answer these questions of how much hydrogen is going to be trapped in ITER. In our lab, we had our own homemade code, but it was not suitable for what we wanted to do. It needed more features. And at that point, I said, okay, let's start from scratch. Let's make yet another code. But I said, this time I'll make it open source. And so we started the development of a code called Festive, which is still used today. And then people in my lab noticed that it was openly accessible on GitHub, and then reported me. I've been asked to shut it down. I was just a mere PhD student, right? So I did what I was told to do, and I shut it down. But then I said, okay, it's not over yet. So I fought for maybe 2-3 years with my institution to kind of explain to them why it was important to open it and make it open source. And that making it open source doesn't mean giving it away, and it doesn't mean just people are gonna steal your work. That's not what open source means. And but the thing that they were the most receptive to was when I said, listen, I'm gonna leave in a couple of months, and I'm the only developer of this code, the only maintainer. That means that when I'm gone, I give this tool a life expectancy of about a year.
Yeah. You
might be able to run it and do some stuff with it for a year, and after that it will die, unless you open source it. Because wherever I go next, I'm going to still need it, and I'm going to recode it from scratch, and probably better because I'll get rid of all the technical debt that I acquired. So something's going to be open anyway, so you might just want to be the tool that I use. And so that's what they understood, and then we open sourced it. And now it's one of the only 2 open source codes in this discipline, and it's used by dozens of people around the world, many, many different institutions, research universities, private companies. So that's my personal experience with open source. And to go back to your initial question of why OSSFE, why this open source software for fusion energy conference, maybe a year ago. I was at a conference in Helsinki. Again, there's something very niche. It was a working group on organized by the IAEA, the International Agency for Atomic Energy. And the meeting was about data for plasma material interactions. I was invited to give a talk, so I gave a talk. And basically my talk was, whatever we do, it needs to be as open and accessible as possible for the community. Otherwise, it will be useless. Because if people cannot access it, cannot inspect it, if it's not transparent, then it's not going to be used, and all these efforts will be for nothing. And maybe half the room agreed with me, but didn't say anything. And the other half didn't agree and was very loud. and so, it was not super well received, that talk. And I had to defend my position against like very senior people in our community that I respect, that are very knowledgeable. And yes, they had some misconceptions around open source. They told me things like, if you open source something, then at some point, some private company will come around and take it for them, add a couple of lines, make it private, sell it, and then you won't be allowed to use it anymore. This is not how it works. Like, this is fundamentally wrong. And because they were much more senior than me, they were believed by a lot of people, and so they managed to convince a lot of people in the room, even if they were saying utter nonsense. I lost that fight in Helsinki. I was fuming. I remember calling one of my friends and colleagues in my hotel room, telling him about this. And that was the genesis of this conference. I was thinking, okay, if they don't take it from me, little Rémi, that's fine. But maybe they will hear it from, if we bring around experts and like actual experts in the field of open source, and maybe they'll take it from them. So I thought, okay, I'm done with the bottom-up approach. Let's try the top-down approach. So let's try to institutionalize open source in our field of fusion energy. And so that was the spark for OSSFE, the Open Source Software for Fusion Energy conference.
What a story. I think you had your wrist slapped quite a few times now. So first when you created an open source project at the time, I guess that was in the UK still, when somebody told you to shut it down?
No, that was in France, actually. In the UK where I worked, open source was very much the default.
Right, okay.
Which is why when I arrived in France, I said, well, let's just make it open source. It's normal.
Which it wasn't, apparently. And then you had your wrist slapped again at the big conference in Helsinki, where all the big bosses, the big boys, I guess they were mainly men, sort of were beating you up.
They were, yes.
I think it's pretty hard to convince people. And I think some listeners may find this difficult to believe because, as you say, in other areas in research, open source is pretty much common currency nowadays.
Yes.
But in yours, not.
That's it. If you look at this conference that we started last year, there are similar conferences in other fields. Like there's PyData, there's the infamous PyCon conference. There's conferences for open source software in geospatial, or very, very niche things. And yet in Fusion, there was a void. Something was missing. But that's fine. We can fit it. And that's what we try to do.
Well, you have to start somewhere. But one thing that intrigues me, when everybody is working in their corner, right? So you have all these different institutes and everybody is more or less developing the same thing because they have a similar need for software. How do you actually know that somebody else is doing something similar? How did you find out that actually there are all these different bespoke, unclosed software projects?
That's a good question. In most science communities and research communities, but especially in Fusion, I see the irony in what I'm about to say. We have a lot of conferences, scientific conferences. That's our primary way of meeting other researchers from the field and sharing results. But sharing results doesn't mean sharing code. So we have a lot of these conferences where you go there for, let's say, 4 days, and then you have 3 different parallel tracks, 10 talks a day, times 3, that's 30 talks a day, times 4. And then all these results are like, oh, look at my amazing research, look at my amazing results, look at my amazing code. None of that is reproducible. You won't be able to use the code for yourself. You just have to trust me, and you just have to give me a round of applause after my 10 minutes talk, and I'll be on my merry way. So that's one way to know that other researchers are working on the exact same thing, because you, like here, sitting in the audience, and you're thinking, well, that's exactly what I do. We could work together. We have the same set of skills, or at least we have some overlaps in our skill set. we could be working together instead of duplicating this, like, or sometimes thinking, I've done that 2 years ago. What this person is presenting, I've done that 2 years ago. That's one way. The second way is just publishing papers. That's another area that I like to work on, where you have all these amazing papers and they showcase some groundbreaking results. But at least in our community, most of the time, this is not reproducible. So you just read the paper, you read the PDF with a few fancy, colorful figures, and that's it. And yes, you can learn, but at best, you can get inspiration to copy this work and, again, make another code and compare the results with that.
Reproducibility is a subject, even with open source software still, because, there's also the data. Can the data be reused, etc.? There's a whole rat tail behind this. But I'd like to go back to the beginnings of the conference. So, you basically had enough. You said you need to change track somehow in order to convince people. So how did you get a reasonable number of people together to actually pull something off like a conference? Because, I want to talk to some people is fine, but I'm running a conference has a different connotation, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're right. That was a big task. And we tried to minimize risks. This conference in Helsinki, that was last summer, and the conference happened in March 25. It remained an idea in my head for quite a while. And then what I started doing was chatting some friends and colleagues about it, like other open source supporters like me, trying to figure out, should we do something? How should we federate people and find a solution together? I also talked about it to one of my, not colleagues, but he's a good friend of mine at ITA. And he was at this meeting in Helsinki, and I was sitting next to him for the whole conference. This slap that I got after my talk, I asked him, I said, do you agree with me? Was it nonsense? And he said, no, I agree with you. And so that's where I realized that a lot of people were agreeing with me, but just not saying anything, probably because they couldn't be bothered to fight this fight. And so I told him about this idea of, should we make a conference? And that's where he said, I'll be supportive of that. So I started by talking to a few people like this. I assembled a team of, maybe 5 people from different institutions, some people from MIT, some people from Europe. And then we said, okay, let's go for it. Let's organize a conference, just like another scientific conference. But the prerogative is that what you present has to be related to open source. And it's not necessarily talking about a specific open source product, but at least if you are showing an analysis or if you're showing some new results, it has to be using an open source stack. The idea was that whatever you present at this conference, people in the audience need to be able to reproduce it.
Or at least access it.
At least access it, yeah. That's how it started. And then we said, okay, well, we don't know if this is going to work or not. We don't know if the community, we think the community wants this, but we don't know. We haven't done any market analysis or any survey or anything, so we don't know. So we decided to try and minimize risks as much as possible. So, okay, this first edition, this first trial will be online, because people are more likely to attend an online event where they don't have to travel, they don't have to book a hotel. So we organized it on Gather Town. I don't know if you know Gather Town, but it kind of boomed. Yeah. It boomed during COVID.
Indeed, I'm having flashbacks.
Yeah. And so I said, okay, let's use that. I chatted with a bunch of people here at MIT, our communications director, and I went to her and I said, well, I'd be happy if we can have 30 people. I would consider that to be a success if we have 30 people and we can have a day of talks and discussions and panels and stuff like that. And she told me, she said, well, actually, by the looks of it, biggest risk with this conference is that you are victim of your own success. And at that time, I thought she was just being supportive and kind.
Okay. But she was right, was she?
But she was right, because when we opened the registration, so first we opened the call for abstracts. That's just shouting out to the community saying, if you want to propose a talk or a poster for this conference, send us an abstract and then we'll review them and we'll select a few. And we received 100 abstracts.
Oh, God, no. That's a lot for a day.
Yes, and so something that I didn't mention is that we wanted it to be a one-day event, also because it was online. Online events, it's tough to attend for more than one day in a row because it gets tiring. So we said, okay, one day online, and then boom, 100 abstracts. So we thought, okay, how are we going to handle all this volume? So that's where we said, okay, we're going to have a bunch of posters. We'll go for 2 parallel tracks, but then we still can't accommodate for 100 talks. So we'll select the best abstracts and then give posters to the people we can't fit. So that's 100 contributions in total. And then we opened the registration. We knew some people would attend, even if they didn't present anything.
Right.
So we said, okay, let's open the registration. And we have 100 people who are contributing. And so that's where we said, okay, let's maybe aim for 150, because we had to pay for this Gather Town thing. MIT was supporting it. I was trying to minimize cost of it because the registration was free. But some people on our team wanted to go big and just let it explode and say, it's no limit. Let's go wild. Let's go crazy. Then we said, okay, let's maybe cap it at 200. We opened the registration. It was sold out in less than 2 weeks.
You needed to widen it beyond 200 then, did you?
I accepted to do a bit of overbooking. Let's do 10% overbooking. So we went to 220, and then in the end, we went to 240. I said we'll stop here.
Did they all turn up?
Not everyone at the same time, obviously, with different time zones. We had people from more than 100 different institutions. 5 different continents were represented. We had people from Australia, a lot of people from Europe, a lot of people from the US, people from Asia. There was one person, listen, they gave their talk at like 3 a.m. in the morning because they were in India. So that was a great success.
The Helsinki conference showed that the people with responsibility in the sector are not yet sold to the idea of using open source, or they were not at the time because they were talking against it. Do you feel that this conference then is a turning point or the beginning of a turning point? And how could you actually get to the people to think again?
It's definitely a very big signal. Speaking to these leaders and the people that actually have the budget and are decision makers, it's a strong signal saying the community wants more open science. The community wants more collaboration and more interactions and more data sharing and more reproducibility, all that kind of stuff. So in terms of signal, that sends a very, very strong signal. We want to convert the try in a way. We don't want this to be a one-off. We will have this conference again next year. And we surveyed the participants, and a lot of people said, online was great, Gather Town was great, but I want more. It will never replace an in-person meeting. The problem was that we had more than half the people surveyed saying they wanted an in-person event, and 40% saying, no, I want it to remain an online event. So now we're in a position where we need to try and find solutions to satisfy both parties. So what we'll do is we'll probably try to alternate and say 1 year in person, 1 year online. We'll have it as a yearly meeting. Now we're at the stage where we're already kind of organizing next year's events. So it will be in Munich.
Oh, wow.
We found a venue. It will be in March next year in Munich, in Germany. We are ironing out some sponsoring stuff and budgets, but that's going well. The other thing that we would like to do is support open source software for fusion energy all year round.
How do you do that?
That's a good question. There's several ways of doing that. Some of the ideas that we had with the board was to organize, I'm not quite familiar with that, but it's called on conferences. Someone on the board wants to organize those. Something that we learned about the community at OSSFE is that the problem is not that the people don't want to do open source and don't want to do open science, but sometimes the problem is that they don't know how to. That's an opportunity that we've identified, thinking, okay, well, we don't want to reinvent the wheel because there's a lot of resources online already available, like the software carpentry and many very good tutorials for how to make open science. But where OSSFE can play a role is by connecting researchers with these resources.
Yeah.
So we could potentially organize these kind of webinars and record them and have it on our YouTube channel so that it's always there, but make it lower the barrier to open science. So lower the barrier to how to make a GitHub repository, how to make a Python package, how to turn your cool code into something that's actually actionable and usable by you. At the time I'm speaking, none of that is done, right? But that's
but it will be.
Yeah. Well, we're in April, and also it happened last month. Maybe you know NumFocus. NumFocus, it's a non-profit that supports open source software for science. The code that I mentioned earlier, Festim, for hydrogen transport simulation, it's affiliated with NumFocus. Once you're affiliated with NumFocus, you can apply for small development grants. It's like up to 10K for a little bit of development. But the problem it's not really a problem, but the specificity of Fusion is that it's very niche. So a code for Fusion applications rarely has applications outside of Fusion.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe sometimes you can have some overlaps with astrophysics, but most of the time it's very niche. And so NumFocus might be a bit too broad. And NumFocus would rather fund, I believe, tools like NumPy or Matplotlib or SciPy that are used by a very, very wide community. So my ambition is to see if we can turn OSSFE into a NumFocus for Fusion.
Right, okay.
A non-profit that would support Fusion software, open source Fusion software, by raising funds and then distributing that to the open source software for Fusion Energy.
There still remains the question of how do you convince the powers to be? So all the people who slapped you down in Helsinki, what do you think it takes to convince them?
A lot of meetings, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, you can try to actively convince them and meet with them, and I think we should definitely do that. It can also be passive, in my opinion.
In what way?
In the way that if we take OSSFE, for instance, OSSFE has made a lot of noise in the community. I went to a meeting in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a couple of weeks ago, and people who did not attend OSSFE asked me about it. That means that it resonated throughout the community. And that was also part of the goal with OSSFE, saying, okay, let's organize a very, very cool event. The point was not to be looking inwards. The point was also to invite people, non-open source people, to this event. All the posters are on Zenodo, all the talks are on Zenodo and on YouTube. And the idea was to say, okay, let's be very loud. Let's send a strong signal so that people might think, wait, hang on, am I the loser? Should I be joining in? Do you see what I mean? So it goes both ways. There's a passive effect by just sharing all this knowledge and doing our thing and hope that if we're loud enough, then people will see it and try to chime in. And there's, a lobby effort to be done.
Yeah, it's like people start to gravitate towards it.
That's the idea. The OSSFE is a black hole, and then we'll slowly attract people. But it's a big topic, though, because you see in a lot of research proposals and like official documents, we often see a lot of buzzwords that are just thrown around, like, open science, open source, fair principle, open data, blah, 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 blah. But when you actually look at the execution of these grants and these projects, you realize very rarely these grand principles are put in action. So there's something to be done in the middle. I think if you talk to the people at the very top, yes, they would like to do more open science. And that's because their incentive is making good use of taxpayer money. Hey, I'm talking about public funding. They're all for open science and open source. The irony is that my PhD, for instance, was funded by public money. My institution asked me to shut down my code. And so I was thinking, isn't it a bit odd that I'm paid by public funding and yet the public cannot access my work? So there's a bit of an irony here. I believe that's because somewhere in the middle, these principles are not enforced. It comes back to education of these middle people, explaining to them that no, releasing your code open source doesn't mean giving it away for free and get no credit for it.
Indeed not.
You might not know how to do it, but it doesn't mean it's difficult. And if we provide you with the right resources, you can do it as well. I think that's how we can activate it.
You've got quite a lot on your plate now. So how much actual Fusion research can you do amongst all that organizing and promoting of open source software now?
Oh, yeah, well, that's the thing. I'm a scientist. I'm paid to undergo research and advance the field of fusion energy. I'm not paid to be an event organizer.
Indeed not, yeah. Which is a full-time job, or it can be at least.
About that, because the OSSFE conference was organized by a bunch of nerds, we tried to use modern tools for everything that has to do with like the logistics of the conference. That's also to minimize the amount of efforts that were needed to organize. So we used open source and GitHub and automation as much as possible, just because we're lazy and we didn't want to bother too much. So like, for example, all our website is openly accessible on GitHub and it's hosted on GitHub pages because we didn't want to bother with our own server and our own deployment and all that. So we leveraged everything that was available in GitHub pages. Things like the process for people to submit an abstract and then converting it and putting it on the book of abstract on our website, all of that is automated. So people would fill in the Google Forms, we would download the CSV, we would just give the CSV to our little code that we wrote in Python, and that would convert everything to markdown files and make a website and format everything. And that's actually this workflow. We didn't invent it. We adapted it from another conference that did it because they made it open source. So we just snatched it, adapted it a bit for us, and then did that. I was very pleased to see that is that people noticed that they had made typos in their names or affiliations or in their abstracts. And instead of just harassing the people on the board with email saying, can you fix this? Can you fix that? They just open pull requests.
And can do it themselves.
This is the right philosophy. This is exactly what we do. So all that to say that if we were to organize OSSFE online again next year, or even in 2 months, it would be very, very little effort on our side because we've automated most of the things and all the machinery is there. Now, the joke is that since we're not doing it online, but in person...
Indeed not. It's a whole different ball game.
Yeah, completely. But we'll be able to reutilize most of the tools that we created for that. So to go back to the initial question, how do I not make it my full-time job? Part of the answer is building tools to facilitate that. Another part is I'm not doing it alone. We have a handful of people that are very committed to the cause and they're helping me a lot. And we do that together and we're very effective.
Good.
And at some point, if OSSFE becomes a non-profit and we can actually raise some funds, then we can hire an actual program manager. And then we can go back to being scientists and offload that to a program manager. And then that will live on. Again, the dream of any open source product is that it becomes self-sustained.
The final question that I have, how long do you think it will take for the area you work in fusion energy, for open source software to be taken as granted rather than something that needs to be fought against? How many years do you think will go down the line before that happens?
I think we're starting to see the inflection point now. OSSFE is not the only initiative trying to push for open source. OSSFE is just trying to federate all these initiatives, but it's far from being the only one. You talked about ITER at the beginning. ITER these days is very much pushing for open source, for releasing new open source software, but also for open sourcing old software and working with all the different labs from the state members to open source their codes. Sometimes it works, sometimes they don't want to, but it's at least there's an effort. Let's be honest, it's not going to happen overnight.
No.
But I think we are at the right time to see the shift happening. I want to be optimistic, and I'll say that in a couple of years, it'd be a lot more mainstream.
Okay. So in a couple of years' time, we're going to meet up again, and then we're going to have a little bit of a look back.
Let's see that. I'll send you a calendar invite. No, but I'm naturally optimistic. It's much easier to do it now than it was a few years back. Just because the tools that are available are just much easier to get to grips with. Like publishing software is easier now than it was a couple of years ago. We have initiatives like JOS, the Journal of Open Source Software, that basically lowers the barrier to publishing software as opposed to publishing scientific results. GitHub has developed tremendously. Now the problem with Fusion is that we have a lot of history, we have a lot of inertia, because a lot of the tools we're using are very, very, very old tools, especially in fields like plasma physics. I'm not a plasma physicist. Every plasma physicist that I talk to, they say that they use very old codes that are written in Fortran and that were written in the 80s and 90s. And they all complain about it because it's not user-friendly and they can't read it and they have to use different types of compilers, blah, 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 blah. But no one seems to actually try to solve the problem and starting from scratch making a new tool just because there's all inertia and there's all this. So it will take some time, but I'm optimistic. I'm going to bet on a couple of years. Let's say 3 to be conservative.
Okay. On that very happy note, I thank you so much for your time. Looks like...
Thank you very much, Peter.
And I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Well, I do like Rémi's enthusiasm and optimism. And if you are working in the field, as you've heard, there's going to be another OSSFE conference in person in 2026. Have a look at their website. In the meantime, you can also look at the proceedings from this year's conference on their site as well. All of the links can be found in the show notes. Next week, the last Tuesday in September 2025, is time for an episode in French. And for this, we'll go to the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, François Mitterrand in Paris, to meet with Guillaume Levrier, who will tell us all about his software project called Pandore. So if you like to listen to an episode in French, see you next week. Or perhaps I should say, à bientôt. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.